The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes? All right, let me begin that again. Thank you for pointing out that my microphone was muted on YouTube. It's good to have a communications team that is on the ball. All right, so let us try that again. Greetings, everybody. I'm Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer, USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for Stardate negative 269127.1. And today we're going to be talking about the third leg of mission readiness, specifically mission readiness as it relates to psychological and emotional things. So what do we mean by mission readiness? Now, this is a concept that we've done a few videos on so far already. I did one video a couple months back talking about the general concept of mission readiness, and then this is the third in a series of mission readiness videos drilling down on specific aspects of it as it relates to physical, intellectual, and today emotional aspects of mission readiness. So let's just do a quick recap about what does mission readiness mean. So let's look at the word mission. What mission are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the mission. So this is the mission that our organization, the USS Dauntless, is all about, which is specifically to bring the message of Gene Roddenberry's vision for the future of humankind to the people of Africa and the Middle East. And that is our reason for existing. That's why we're here. That is our mission. But this is also broken up in a couple of different ways. One, it's clarified in a number of points called standing orders, but also it's broken up into individual discrete missions. Every time the Dauntless crew does something together, we are embarking on a mission, a specific mission. So it's a little confusing. The word mission has two different meanings. One of them refers to the overarching mission of what we do, and then the other refers to individual specific missions, which might be a games night, it might be a blood donation mission, it might be a movie night. Any of those kinds of things are a mission. Now, the mission statement is clarified in a number of standing orders, 5 to be exact. The first 2 are the most important, but 3, 4, and 5 are important too. Today we're going to be looking at standing order number 2, which is to encourage initiatives to help bring about the future envisioned in Star Trek, and that is an optimistic future in which most of the obstacles and the troubles that face present-day humanity have been largely, if not entirely, eradicated, and we would like to help society move in a direction that looks kind of like that. We would like to make society better for everybody by helping to solve the problems that we face. And that is further clarified in a number of subpoints. And the one we're looking at when it comes to mission readiness is this one: work to better ourselves mentally and physically. And we call this mission readiness. It's really self-improvement, but we call it mission readiness because we want to be the best possible version of ourselves so that we can be ready to undertake any mission that we might undertake, right? We're ready to take on the challenge. And when it comes to a psychological or emotional point of view, we are working to ensure that we possess the emotional fortitude to perform any duty we may be called upon to do. So that's what the psychological or emotional side of mission readiness deals with. And particularly, we're talking about kind of 2 aspects of it. We're talking about eliminating the emotional and psychological barriers that prevent us from doing the things that we want to do, that prevent us from being the best possible version of ourselves. And also it's about motivating ourselves to do better. And those 2 things are not separate. They are inextricably interwoven. One feeds off the other. You motivate yourself to eliminate barriers, and you eliminate barriers by motivating yourself, and they feed back upon each other. But you can kind of think of those as the left hand and right hand of emotional mission readiness. Now, there's one one tool that we can look at in the Star Trek canon. There are plenty of tools, and we'll go into more about that later. But one in particular, I think, is especially valuable when it comes to the emotional side of mission readiness, and that is what is called in the Star Trek canon Vulcan logic. Vulcans, if you haven't seen a lot of Star Trek, you might be familiar. Vulcans are an alien race in which they have abandoned emotionality and have adopted instead what they call logic. It's not really the same thing that we call logic. To us, logic is a mechanism that we use for understanding the universe. Vulcan logic it's kind of related to that, but it's a bit different. Really, we're talking about something that resembles Stoic philosophy. So Vulcan logic and Stoic philosophy are very similar, and it's worth looking into what Stoic philosophy is and how it relates to Vulcan logic, how these two things are similar and how they're different. But Stoic philosophy is worth studying if building up your emotional resilience is something that you'd like to pursue. What is Stoic philosophy? Well, I'm not going to go into a full lecture about it this time, maybe in a future video, but here is kind of the shortest possible oversimplification of what Stoicism is all about. So first of all, Stoicism is named in ancient Rome, in the Roman Empire, the imperial times, and it kind of boils down to these 5 points, which again are a gross oversimplification. But if you can get your head around these 5 things, you're well on your way to understanding how Stoicism works. First is that you recognize what you can and cannot control. Second, you determine your reaction to a crisis. You determine your reaction to a crisis. 3, ignore people dominated by their own negative emotions. 4, master yourself and aim to be virtuous. And 5, learn to move on. Now, there is a lot of meaning packed up into these 5 axioms, these 5 statements, and literal millennia of thought and writing and consideration have gone into evaluating the utility and practicality of this mode of thought. But it's seeing something of a resurgence in popular culture today, so there's a lot of resources available to you if you're interested in learning more about Stoicism. It's probably never been easier in the history of mankind, even in the time when Marcus Aurelius himself was writing about Stoicism 2,000 years ago. Even since then, it's much easier now to learn about it. So if it's interesting to you, I suggest you go and take a look at Stoicism. It might be helpful to you in this endeavor. All right, so essentially what we're looking at, if I was to summarize it even more beyond those 5 points, is that the thing to take away from Stoicism is that you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. So that's something that helps to frame the entire discussion of the tone of how we're going to be proceeding today when it talks about the emotional side of mission readiness. Now, when we're talking about emotional mission readiness, there are really 2 big words that we're going to keep on coming up over and over again. And these are 2 things that are faced by just about everybody. In fact, I'd probably say every single human has ever existed has dealt with these 2 things to some extent, some people more than others. And at some times in your life, you might deal with it a lot, other times not so much. But these 2 things, these 2 words are depression and anxiety. Now, these are things that are not uncommon to the human experience. As I said, just about everybody, if not every single person, deals with it to some extent. Depression and anxiety. These are so fundamental to the human experience that, it's oftentimes to Lieutenant Kimberly says, hello, darkness, my old friend. Yes. So these 2 things are actually not even separate. Depression and anxiety are kind of 2 sides of the same coin. They're chemically quite similar. Neurologically, they originate from the same place. Even when it comes to treatment of them, medically speaking, you do so in much the same way. They kind of feel quite different, but actually they're really quite similar. Comorbidity also. People who are clinically diagnosed with one are very, very likely to be diagnosed with the other as well. These are 2 things that come hand in hand: depression and anxiety. Now, it's worth saying up front that these words have kind of migrated in their utility, especially within the last couple of decades. I mean, within my adult life, I've noticed this happening, where not that long ago, you could just be described as being a person who tended towards the melancholy, or you might be a person who tended to be a little highly strung. But now those same syndromes, that same presentation would be labeled as being either depressive or anxious, which are medical terms. And there are complicated economic and social reasons for why that diagnosis has changed, but it has actually changed. The medical diagnosis for both depression and anxiety have been rewritten once or twice since then and made more expansive so that more people who suffer from these things fall into this bucket of either depression or anxiety or both. So that's not in itself necessarily alarming. What might be alarming is that we see statistically a vast increase in the number of cases of people who are diagnosed with anxiety and depression. A lot of that is probably accounted for by the fact that that diagnosis has been expanded. So people who otherwise would have fallen outside of those medical criteria, now the criteria have been rewritten so those people fall inside. But also there might be social forces at work that might be contributing to that as well. But depression and anxiety are kind of universal experiences that everybody has to deal with at some point in their lives, if not all the time. But the thing I would recommend to anybody when dealing with this kind of thing, and not just depression and anxiety, but any kind of mental illness, is if you receive a diagnosis, in fact, any kind of illness, not only mental, but if you receive a diagnosis, I would strongly recommend avoiding identifying yourself with the label of that diagnosis. So let's say you've been to a doctor and the doctor has said, okay, it looks like you meet the clinical definition for depression. Therefore, you are a person who has depression, you are depressed. That should not define who you are. And the reason I say that, you want to try and avoid internalizing that diagnosis, because if you start thinking of yourself as a depressed person or as a person with depression, that can start to become the boundaries of your existence. You can start to set limits of yourself on yourself, even unconsciously. In fact, especially unconsciously, you can start to set limits on what you can achieve, what you can do in your life. If you think of yourselves within the context and within the confines of that diagnosis, I would strongly recommend don't ignore the diagnosis, take it on board, use it for what it's intended for, which is a label that allows you access to certain treatment options to help improve your situation, but try to avoid internalizing that diagnosis and using it to identify yourself. Captain Ben Cronin says your mind is your mind's worst enemy. Yes, 100%. And we're going to be dealing with exactly that point a few times in today's session. Right, so avoid identifying with the label of depression or anxiety or any other kind of medical diagnosis. Just because you have diabetes doesn't, and you happen to be a person who is diabetic, that doesn't mean that diabetes has to be your entire identity or even a significant part of your identity. It's just one thing about you out of millions of things about you. You can be described in many, many different ways, only one of which is that you are a person who has this diagnosis. Lieutenant Kimberly says, you are not your diagnosis. Yes, very important to keep that in mind. That said, when it comes to dealing with these kinds of things, there are a number of things that you can do. Some that are relatively easy and inexpensive and have little to no side effects, in fact, might be even beneficial, and some that become more difficult, more complex, more expensive, and even risky when it comes to mitigating these kinds of maladies, this kind of a situation. And you want to pick your treatment modality based on how much the situation is affecting your life. If you feel a little down sometimes, but otherwise it doesn't affect your life, then you probably don't need much intervention. You might want to consider the things that would be beneficial for you anyway, and if they have the added benefit of helping you with feeling down a little bit sometimes, then so much the better. But if this is a situation that you deal with every day where you have trouble getting out of bed because you're so anxious or so depressed, you struggle to maintain personal relationships, it might get in the way of keeping down a job, that is a severe situation and you need professional intervention. And we'll get into what that looks like now. But let's look at some steps you can take to figure out how much intervention you need in order to address your situation. And I'm going to be dealing primarily again with anxiety and depression simply because they are so universal and because they are kind of emblematic of mental illness and mental wellness in general. So other diagnoses, other conditions you might have will probably be treated in much a similar way, although the specifics might vary from one thing to another. The overall approach is probably very similar. So the first thing you can try doing if you suffer from anxiety or depression is to suck it up. I know it's not popular to say that, I might get cancelled for putting this on YouTube, but it really is a thing you can do. You can just suck it up. You can, if you're feeling a little bit down, you're feeling a little bit demotivated, you're feeling a little bit anxious, if you take a deep breath, clear your thoughts, and then just do it anyway. Do the thing that you were going to do regardless of how you feel. Your feelings matter and they're important to you, but they don't necessarily have to be a barrier to doing what you need to do. If you're feeling a certain way about a thing, that's that state of how you're feeling exists entirely within your own mind, and it doesn't necessarily stop you from doing the things that you do. Lieutenant Kimberly says, "Dad, is that you?" Um, I'm I'm not going to address that. Um, so sucking it up is a thing that you can do. That is a way that you can deal with a lot of these kinds of things, depending on how severe it is. And if sucking it up alone is not enough, the next step I strongly recommend, and in fact, even if sucking it up is enough, I strongly recommend this next step anyway for anybody all the time, regardless, and that is get fit. So getting fit is a thing that you can do that will have innumerable benefits to your life. And that is, I mean, I've done an entire video about getting fit and how fitness can help to improve not only your emotional well-being, but also your physical, mental well-being. It can extend your life, improve your quality of life. It can help you to manage chronic conditions that are not only physical, but also emotional. Things like depression and anxiety can definitely be aided through getting fit, especially through cardiovascular fitness, but all-round fitness, putting on muscle mass and getting out in the world, learning physical skills. All of these things can help you to manage your things like depression and anxiety and other psychological concerns, to help to manage your emotional well-being. I think anybody who's gone from a state of being unfit to a state of becoming fit would agree with me on this, that it just becomes that much easier to help to manage your mood and your emotional state once you are in good physical condition. And there are a lot of physical and chemical reasons for that, which I covered mostly in the Mission Readiness video about the physical side of mission readiness. If sucking it up and getting fit are not enough, the next step I suggest is talking to somebody. So there are professionals who are paid to do this kind of work. They're called therapists, and there are a wide variety of therapists available who offer therapy in all kinds of things. There are lots of different therapy modalities, some of which might be good for you, some of which might not work for you, but it's worth shopping around and trying different things to see what kind of a thing works for you, whether it's just straightforward talk therapy, whether it's occupational therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. There are plenty of qualified people out there who can assist you with these things. I would recommend not just sticking with the first person that you find. There are plenty of available tools online that you can use to find a practitioner who not only offers the service that you might find most beneficial, but who also might have the right kind of personality, the right kind of values to assist you in that way. Colonel Ube says, getting fit also sucks, but it has helped me with my stress levels. Yeah, definitely, 100%. I'll actually be addressing that exact point a little later. But therapy, yeah, there are virtually no downsides to therapy, except it could be a little bit costly and it takes some time. You usually have a weekly session or a bi-weekly session or that kind of thing. But it can definitely be beneficial for a lot of people dealing with these kinds of situations. But if your situation is such that sucking it up isn't enough, and getting fit isn't enough, and therapy isn't enough, then the next step is psychiatric intervention. So your therapist would typically be able to refer you to a psychiatrist who can then help you do what needs to be done. Now, there are a lot of very sophisticated psychiatric interventions available on the market that can help with all kinds of things. Some are better than others, some are more expensive than others, and almost all of them have side effects, which is why psychiatric intervention is something you should probably hold off on until you're sure that you need it. But when you need it, this is what needs to be done. That's interesting. I'll address that documentary. Shamali, sorry, I'm so used to pronouncing it incorrectly. I recently learned that I've been pronouncing Lieutenant Shamali's surname incorrectly the entire time. So I'm trying to drum into my brain the correct way of doing that. But that is not helped at all by psychiatric medication. Psychiatric medication is definitely something that you would need if your condition is severe enough that therapy and getting fit and sucking it up are not sufficient to get you through. Ideally, these kinds of interventions are intended to be temporary. It provides a kind of chemical crutch to help get your brain back on its feet, metaphorically speaking, to get your brain producing all the right chemicals in the right balance, the right quantities to keep things ticking over on their own. But with some people who have some kind of a damage or something in there, you might need to be on these interventions chronically. That's a thing that happens sometimes. The downside with these kinds of interventions is they do typically have side effects. So you're going to have to work closely with your psychiatrist to figure out what the right balance is in terms of benefit versus downside versus cost versus inconvenience, and being able to stick to your treatment regimen long term, find the right intervention, the right dosage, and that kind of thing. That's not an easy project to embark on, but once you get it right, it can change your life. So if you are the kind of person that needs a psychiatric intervention, strongly recommend you seek it out and get going on that. There are medical insurance schemes that will offer all kinds of benefits to cover these kinds of um, um, uh, medical interventions. Lieutenant Shamali says that Discovery Health, which is one of the major medical insurance schemes in this country, has added 21 clinical therapy sessions to their basic plan, which is great. Is the medical aid, not the ship. So yes, when we're googling Discovery here in South Africa, sometimes you get Discovery Health, sometimes you get Star Trek Discovery. It gets a little confusing, but based on the right context, sometimes you get it right. Lieutenant Shamali says, totally fine. I know to listen out for whatever somewhat sound like my name. Yes, let's hope that that's correct. Captain Finkrina says, horrible side effects. Yes, sometimes the side effects can be quite rough, and that's part of the balancing act that you need to negotiate with your healthcare provider, is try to figure out how harsh the side effects can be and whether or not you can live with those versus the effects of the actual illness. And sometimes that involves switching to a different treatment, trying different ones to see which one works better than others, and which side effects you can live with, which versus which ones are not suitable for you and not tolerable for you. Lieutenant Shamali says, I have a chemical imbalance. My body just does not manufacture specific chemicals that makes my brain think that I've experienced the worst life has to offer. Yeah, that's the thing that happens with some people. Have a permanent chemical imbalance that needs to be addressed with chronic medication sometimes. Yeah, that happens with some people, and it's unfortunate that that's necessary. For most people, most of the time, thankfully, it's a relatively short-term intervention just to get things ticking over normally. But everybody has a different situation for these kinds of things. Now, I want to talk about one specific instance when we're talking about anxiety disorders, and that is phobias. So a phobia is an irrational fear of a specific stimuli, whether it's a specific object like a clown or a snake or blood, or whether it's a specific kind of situation like open spaces or confined spaces, or whether it's a social phobia, so you're afraid of interacting with new people. These kinds of intense, overwhelming, irrational fears can be quite debilitating, depending on your circumstances. If you have a fear of snakes, but you live in Ireland, that's probably not going to be much of an obstacle to you. But if you have a fear of human beings and you happen to be a human being, that's going to be a very big problem for you, and you're going to have to address that. If you have a fear of insects and you live anywhere on planet Earth, that's going to be an obstacle for you that's going to require some intervention. Chief Newton says fear of heights. Yeah, that can also be a problem depending on your situation. So phobias are definitely something that needs addressing. And phobias being a form of anxiety disorder can be addressed with pretty much all of the modalities that I've spoken about up until now. So sucking it up can help some of the time. Getting fit can help you to regulate your emotions so that your response to that fear-inducing stimuli is more manageable. Getting therapy for it is going to be beneficial, even psychiatric intervention if it's absolutely necessary. One particular modality that's often been cited as quite useful for phobias is what they call exposure therapy, and this is something that you can even do yourself without necessarily needing to involve a medical professional. So if you know which stimuli triggers your phobic response, you can start working on exposing yourself to that stimulus in small doses in a safe, controlled environment, little bit by little bit, until you build up a tolerance towards that thing. And in fact, in a lot of cases, exposure therapy can completely eliminate that phobia. I'd recommend making sure that you are safe and controlled. Don't go and throw yourself into an environment where there's going to be lots of spiders that you might cause you to panic and then put your health at risk. Make sure that you are safe and you have somebody supporting you and helping you out with when it comes to this kind of thing. But if you've got, for example, a social phobia, then surrounding yourself with people in a safe and helpful environment, preferably with somebody who you know and trust, can help you to mitigate that phobia over time by exposure gradually. Lieutenant Shamali says, do you think this works for allergies too? Nutella smells so good. I think I have read a study or two about that. I think allergies are a bit trickier because they don't all work off the same chemical pathway. So it depends on the specific allergy as to whether or not exposure therapy can be beneficial. But I know that it can for some. I remember I was diagnosed with an allergy when I was a kid, and the doctor recommended, my allergy was to pet dander, and the doctor recommended that exposure to pets would diminish my allergy, and it has. So I now work with cats in addition to having pets in my home, and I no longer have any hint of that allergy. So I suppose with some allergies it would be helpful. When it comes to tree nut allergy, I'm not sure. I suggest you consult with your medical professional about that kind of thing. I think that it would be dependent on the chemical pathway that triggers the histaminic response. So I'm not quite sure if it would apply across the board. But for a lot of people who suffer with phobias, especially ones that get in the way of their everyday lives, exposure therapy can definitely be a way to help manage that kind of thing. And here at Orthodontists, we have a safe, supportive environment where we can help you do that kind of thing. If you have a phobic trigger that relates in some way to your Starfleet service, then we can provide a safe and controlled environment in which we can expose you to that thing a little bit at a time until you are comfortable with it and able to manage it, like the Starfleet officer here who is handling that spider. But I mean, spiders are really just 8-legged kittens. They're not that big a deal, but some people are very scared of them. All right. I've mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention it again because it's very important. Spiders can burn, says Captain Van Krenen. Sure, spiders can be dangerous, but so can kittens. So as long as you as long as you're taking the appropriate precautions, then they're not necessarily dangerous. Colonel Ube says, I can't look at the screen. Well, just look at the screen. It's fine. It can't hurt you. You're in a safe environment right now. Let's do a little bit of exposure therapy right now on the stream. Captain Finkrona says, no, as in they can go away. I've not looked at the screen since the spider. It's all right. Here's your safe space, guys. Just look at the screen. You'll be fine. It can't hurt you. Just a little bit, activates my fight or flight. You see, that's exactly the kind of irrational phobic response I'm talking about. And that's the kind of anxiety that we can help to address with a little bit of exposure therapy. But tell you what, guys, I will email you this image, or I'll post it in an instant message every day so that we can expose you to it just a little bit at a time. All right, so I keep mentioning this because it's just so important, but one of the things, probably the most important thing you can do to help with your mental health is becoming physically fit. Captain Asa Colonel Yubert concurred with me earlier. Exercising is, there's just no way to underestimate how important it is. And there are I went into a lot of detail about this on a previous mission readiness briefing, talking about physical fitness, but there are essentially three main legs to becoming physically fit, at least as I advocate it for a Starfleet officer. A good, well-rounded training regimen should include cardiovascular training, so that's exercise that causes you to breathe heavily, so that's things like running, swimming, cycling, that kind of thing. That's cardiovascular exercise. There's resistance training, which is designed to help you build muscle mass to get stronger, so that's things like weights or that kind of resistance training, or weighted bands, weight machines, that kind of thing. And then there's functional training, which is learning how to learn specific physical skills that help you do a thing in the world. I recommend martial arts, but other things like dancing or yoga would also be beneficial for that kind of functional training. So 3 different kinds of fitness, all of which contribute to building up your body's ability to manage your emotional state, which will then overall help you regulate your emotional well-being, your psychological well-being. Another important factor, which is often understated, is sunshine. Sunshine is surprisingly important when it comes to helping to manage your emotional state. Now, sunshine is a tricky one because we've all been told since I was a little kid, and I'm sure for most people's lives who are watching this today, that sunshine is dangerous. You should be wearing sunscreen before you go out in the sun. And yes, that can be true. Excess exposure of ultraviolet radiation can cause skin conditions and needs to be guarded against. But that doesn't mean we should be avoiding sunshine altogether. A small amount of sunshine on a regular basis does a lot of important things for us. For starters, it helps to stimulate serotonin and endorphin release. Serotonin helps you with mood regulation. Serotonin is one of the medications that you would receive if you were undergoing psychiatric treatment for things like anxiety and depression. You would receive drugs that help you to regulate your serotonin production and absorption. So serotonin production stimulated by sunlight, very important. Endorphins, of course, are the feel-good hormones of your body, help to elevate your mood, and they are also associated with pain relief. A lot of times, people who suffer with prolonged or chronic pain will have associated depression. So if you can assist with your pain relief, that will help to alleviate your mood as well. Captain Van Crane says, I enjoy my sunshine filtered through dark gray, heavy clouds. Unfortunately, that's going to be a lot less beneficial. I mean, it's better than nothing, I suppose, but it's not as good as just getting a few minutes of direct sunshine. Making sure that you get, of course, properly protected from ultraviolet rays. So sunscreen is not a bad idea. It doesn't actually stop any of these other beneficial things from happening, like vitamin D stimulation. That's the thing that we hear about most often when it comes to sunshine, is that it stimulates vitamin D production. So vitamin D is one of those that you don't really get dietarily. I mean, you can eat it, but you actually produce it within your own body, but it needs to be stimulated, and that comes through sunshine. And what vitamin D does is it helps to regulate your blood pressure. Blood pressure is a physical response that can happen when you are in an emotionally heightened state. So if you can help to manage your blood pressure, that can help you to regulate your emotional responses as well. And then it also helps to regulate your circadian rhythms. During the physical side of Mission Readiness video, I spoke extensively about how important it is to get enough quality sleep. And exposure to sunlight helps to regulate your circadian rhythm, which helps to get enough sleep and good quality sleep. Sunshine is so important. Don't need a lot, a few minutes a day is enough, and make sure that you're protected from ultraviolet by making sure you have sunscreen. If you're going to be out there for longer than 3 or 4 minutes, you probably want to make sure you're safe. But just being out on a cloudy day or seeing it through a window is probably not enough. You want to actually be out in the sun, feeling it on your skin. That's really beneficial. And in fact, we see that in places where sunshine is at a premium. People who live very high latitudes, north and south, where there is no sunshine available, sometimes for weeks or even months of the year, they can suffer very severe emotional disturbances. They actually have to take technological advances. They have to install artificial sun lamps in their homes so as to simulate the stimulation received from sunshine. Sunshine is actually surprisingly important for human health, because we did evolve on a planet that is close to a giant fireball. Whether we enjoy that or not doesn't erase the fact that we actually need it. Another important factor, also often overlooked, is the importance of social relationships. Social relationships are correlated with good health outcomes in just so many things across the board. The list is too long, but essentially, I mean, sort of here are the highlights. Firstly, it helps to reduce the risk of social isolation. Social isolation is very, very highly correlated with symptoms of depression. We are an intensely social species, one of the most social species of animal that we know of. Humans are physically and chemically dependent on interacting with each other, and isolating ourselves causes us immeasurable harm. Yeah, we want to reduce the risk of social isolation, and the way we do that is just by getting out and spending time with people. It also offers an opportunity for emotional support. So having conversations with other people is essentially free therapy. When you go for psychotherapy with a therapist, a lot of what you're doing there, a lot of what you're paying for, is just to have someone listen to you talk about your problems. That in itself can be immensely therapeutic. And if you have friends, people who you can talk to, you're getting a lot of the benefit that you would be getting from therapy simply from having that physical relationship with the person. I mean, with that social relationship with the person. It doesn't even have to be a physical one. The social hormones can help to manage blood pressure as well. Remember that blood pressure, especially elevated blood pressure, can be a response to high stress situations like anxiety. And if your social hormones are pumping because you've been stimulated through social conversations with other people, it will help you to regulate that emotional response. That also helps to improve your cognitive function. It helps you sleep better through also the stimulation of the appropriate hormones. It also helps you to boost your self-esteem. Low self-esteem is one of the trigger points that will set off depression for a lot of people. But if you're surrounded by a group of people who think highly of you, who like you, you're receiving that social feedback, whether you're conscious of it or not, that helps to bolster your self-esteem, which can help to stave off the effects of depression, and also helps you to develop a sense of purpose, which is a somewhat more nebulous concept when it comes to this kind of thing. There's no direct chemical correlate when it comes to a sense of purpose, but having a sense of purpose definitely correlates in study after study with people who enjoy superior emotional outcomes. Now, it just so happens that here we have a social community here aboard the Dauntless. We are a community of people. We can develop and maintain friendships here, and we even have a joint purpose that we can subscribe to and work towards, which is sharing the joy of Star Trek with people and helping to bring about a Star Trek-like future. We already have that purpose. We already have that social structure. So if you're not already maximizing your utility of that social community, I recommend you step up your engagement and join in one of the text channels and say hi, because we are just a group of people here wanting to be your friend. Social relationships are very important to managing your emotional health. Now, the thing about all of this kind of thing is, so that is all about eliminating barriers that will get in your way of being the best possible version of yourself. But also there's the other side of it, which is motivation. How do you motivate yourself to do important things? Not only important things separate from these things, but how do you motivate yourself to do these things? And finding inspiration is a very important aspect of that. It's about finding models of the behavior that you want to embody uh, already being displayed by other people and looking to see how they do it. And one of the easiest sources we have available to us that is readily to hand, and that is Star Trek. Star Trek is a massive body of work, close to 1,000 episodes at this point, hundreds and hundreds of hours of content, full of mythic narratives telling stories about people doing amazing things. If you're looking for inspiration, you're looking for motivation, you needn't look no further than Star Trek. Even if you're only watching our daily devotional episodes, you can find in any given episode inspirational quotes, inspirational characters, situations, people, environments, people doing amazing things with what little they have to hand. Star Trek is an amazing source of inspiration. So I strongly recommend using that tool that is so readily available to us. We are immersing ourselves in that environment, in that space, in the world of Star Trek. So Star Trek is a great source to look at for inspiration. Before we continue, any comments we have then? Lieutenant Shamali says, caffeine is my feel-good chemical. Yes, I concur with that. Caffeine is also, it is a stimulant, so it can help to elevate your mood a little bit. So that's good. Captain Concurrence says, we are plants then, and Lieutenant Shamali says, rusty plants. Yes, we are plants. We are in fact rusty plants, and we do require sunshine. We don't photosynthesize like plants do. We don't need sunshine to breathe, but we do need it for other important things. We did evolve on this planet where there is sun, and so we are dependent on it. Captain Concurrence says, talking and getting things from outside, getting things outside from inside is hugely helpful. Yes, keeping things bottled up isn't always the best way to deal with your emotional state of being. I mean, some people find that beneficial, but it's not necessarily the right way. And if you're the kind of person that finds it helpful to express the things that you're going through, then you should absolutely be doing so. First choice should be finding friends. And if your friends don't want to listen, then find a therapist. It works just the same. Chief Newton says, my love of Star Trek is what brought my Mzadi, that's Apprentice Matthews and I, together. Yes, so not only can Star Trek be an inspirational place, but it can also be a a bonding experience that you can use to develop relationships with people. My romantic partner and I also bonded over Star Trek at the beginning of our relationship, and we continue to do so every day. It's just part of our lives that we share the love of Star Trek together. Um, so when it comes to all of this kind of stuff, one of the things we need to keep in mind, and refers to mission readiness in general. In fact, we can get rid of this now. When it comes to mission readiness in general, not only the psychological side of things, this is what ties it all together. And that is, we need to be able to recognize and understand our limitations and work around them. So I want to be clear about, we're not understanding our limitations from a point of view of looking for excuses not to do things. We're not hiding behind a diagnostic label like, I have depression, I can't do this. I have anxiety, I can't do this. It's not about that. It's about recognizing where our limitations are and finding strategies of either pushing those limitations further back, expanding our capabilities, and in the short term, finding ways of working around those limitations. And by way of example, I'd like to share an anecdote from my own life. So, for most of my life, I've recognized, I've been aware that becoming physically fit was something that was worthwhile pursuing. I knew about the health benefits. I knew that it was valuable and worth doing. But what I didn't know was how to do it, because I've always hated exercise. I don't enjoy it. It's not fun for me. I consider it a torturous experience. I just really don't enjoy it. So for the longest time, I would do things like, I would join a gym, I would go 3 times, and then just pay the subscription fee for years and never set foot in the place again. And I'd go through, cycles of this 2 or 3 years. I'd resolve to get fit, and then I'd go to the gym for 3 more times, and then I'd give up on it because it didn't feel right. It was such a miserable thing to do. I couldn't tolerate it. It took me much longer than it ought to have to find the sort of self-awareness to develop a strategy that could motivate myself to do the thing. So this is finding the motivation, but also about eliminating barriers. And I discovered that there are 2 important things about myself that knowing them gave me the tools I needed in order to pursue this project of becoming physically fit. The one thing I learned about myself was that it was very helpful for me to have a reward in place. So I gave myself a reward for doing the things that needed to be done. And specifically, I beg your pardon, those beeps are just my house computer responding for some reason, even though I wasn't talking to it. Anyway, so the rewards that I set up for myself looked like this. The deal I made with myself was that my gym that I was subscribed to at that time was across the road from McDonald's. And my deal was, I was allowed to go to McDonald's and have lunch on condition that I went to the gym first. I wasn't allowed to have McDonald's, which I enjoy. I wasn't allowed to have McDonald's unless I had been to the gym. I didn't have to spend an hour and a half at the gym doing every single muscle group. I just had to go to the gym and do something, even if it was only 10 minutes on the treadmill. That was enough to unlock the reward of going to McDonald's. Once I'd established that pattern of allowing myself to go to McDonald's after I'd gone to the gym, I then got into the habit of feeling that once I was in the gym, just doing that 10 minutes on the treadmill felt like a bit of a waste of time. Since I'm here anyway, I may as well do some time on the circuit. I may as well do a little bit of weightlifting. I may as well start pushing my endurance time on the gym. I start on the treadmill. Might as well start pushing my ability to run on the treadmill. I'd never been able to run because I was diagnosed with asthma as a child, and I'd been told by my doctor not to run. But I was determined to figure out how to overcome that limitation, and I did. So that was the one side of it, was establishing that reward mechanism for myself. I'm allowed to have McDonald's as long as I go to the gym. The other side of it was that to mitigate the fact that I hated the exercise so much, was I figured out that I could create a situation where I was exercising without paying any attention to what I was doing. So in other words, my mind was off doing one thing and my body was here doing the exercise. And this was quite complicated, and it required a certain level of technology existing in order for this to work. But the 2 main tools that I used for that was, one, podcasts. So podcasts had become ubiquitous. I was able to subscribe to them on my smartphone. I could pop my buds in, listen to a very interesting, stimulating podcast so that my mind could be focused on that thing. But now, how do you focus on one thing and then do another? Well, I had to figure out a system of getting my body to exercise without thinking about it. And that was dependent on getting a PerScan, a smartwatch. I was able to find an app that allowed me to program beforehand my exercise routine into my watch, Then when I was at the gym, I could activate the routine, and all I had to do was glance at the screen. It would tell me which machine to go to set the number of weights, and it would then tell me to start pushing. I could start doing my reps, start doing my pushes. It would vibrate then when my set was complete, and I knew that that was my signal to take a rest. A few seconds later, it would vibrate again. That meant it was time for me to go again. When it vibrated twice, that meant it was time to move to a new machine. I just had to glance at my watch again to see which machine to go to and what weight to set. And I could just autopilot my way through an entire workout while thinking about a podcast about ancient history or physics or sociology or any other topic. And I found that immensely helpful. And so here is that is how that worked. So I had, with the combination of those two factors, I was able to essentially trick myself into going to the gym regularly. And I have never looked back. We're now sort of 7 or 8 years down the line from that. I'm infinitely healthier, infinitely fitter than I was then. The chronic conditions that I was diagnosed with, including asthma, are now completely in remission and under control solely through using exercise. I no longer have to take any kind of medication to manage any of the things that I deal with. And my life is infinitely improved. In fact, so much to the point that I no longer need to use that reward mechanism anymore. That fell by the wayside years ago. I haven't felt the need to do that anymore. And even the distraction bubble that I needed to create doesn't need to be anywhere near as complete as it once did. In fact, it's usually sufficient for me to just scroll through some Instagram reels between sets, and it's fine. That's actually sufficient. So getting myself going on that, developing that habit of working out regularly and training uh, uh, solidly and routinely, consistently. That's the word I was looking for. Training consistently. That was a non-trivial expenditure of effort. But once I was able to establish that routine, it was so much better for me, and life has drastically improved. Captain Verhoeven says, I would just not have McDonald's ever again then. Yeah, I guess. Colonel Libre says, my trick is using an interactive app that puts you in a zombie apocalypse and you run away from zombies and have to run to continue the story. That's a great tool. That's very cool. I wasn't ready to use a tool like that. I think it's called Zombies Run. I remember you recommending that to me years ago. And I did give it a go, and it wasn't for me. It wasn't the right tool for me. But it sounds like a great idea. And if that works for you, then that's fantastic. Um, So, all right. So that's my personal anecdote, and I hope that illustrates that self-awareness and learning to understand your own limitations and your own constraints, and working not only to push those back, but also to work around them in the short term. That's really what we're talking about when it comes to mission readiness, about eliminating barriers and about inspiring yourself to do things that matter despite them. And there's a couple of things that are important to remember that I'd like to leave you with before we wrap up today. And the first thing is that to remind you that everybody moves at your own pace, and what's important is that you're making progress. Sometimes it can be difficult, sometimes it can be slow, sometimes it's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. But as long as your average trajectory is forwards and not backwards and not standing still, then that is you doing your job. That means that you're working towards attaining mission readiness, that ever receding goal of being the best possible version of yourself. Moving forwards is what matters. It doesn't matter how fast you do so. In specific terms, that means it matters that you go to the gym and you do something, even if it's only 10 minutes on the treadmill, because you're developing the habit, you're developing the consistency, and you're developing the frame of mind that will make it easier for you to do other things in the future. It's okay if you do the bare minimum now, as long as you are seeing the bigger picture that someday that means you'll be able to do more. So forward steps are what matter. The backwards steps are just slowing you down, but that's not that big a deal. Another thing to remember is that the only person who's responsible for your emotional state is you. Nobody else is accountable, and nobody else can fix it for you. To remind myself about that, there's a mantra or something I like to remind myself. It's just a saying that I like to run through my head from time to time if I ever feel like I'm being put upon, like I'm something of a victim of the world or victim of my circumstances. And it goes something like this: I'm on my own. Nobody is coming to save me. It's up to me. Um, all right. I think that's it for today, unless we have any more comments. Let's see. Talking about Zombies Run is a great tool. That's great. Always keep waltzing. Sure. Kenny Bear says improvement is also not a straight line. So don't get too motivated. It feels like you're not improving constantly. Just keep trying. Yes, 100%. So on average, as long as your trajectory is forwards, there are going to be backward steps sometimes. You are going to be set back. You can't train if you're sick. You can't train if you're injured. That means you're going to take a hit to your training regimen, but that's okay, because once you're able to, you'll get back on that bike, you'll get back on that bench press, and you'll start running again and start moving forward again. It's the average progress that matters, not the day-to-day progress necessarily. All right, I'd just like to thank everybody who is here in the session. We've got Chief Newton, we've got Apprentice Matthews, we've got Colonel Hubert, Master Chief Kotze, Captain Van Groenen, and Lieutenant Shamali. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I think it's been a great session. It's been quite a long one of our longest ones to date. And we are going to call it there. And remember, of course, that if you are watching this after the time, you're welcome to drop comments on YouTube or contact me directly on any of the various platforms that we use for communication. And I will address your question either in the moment or perhaps in an upcoming video. We'll be seeing you again at the next session like this, at the same time next week. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again today. Swart out.